Post-stroke eAG elevation despite metformin use, a longitudinal self-case study, number 1514, PPT071, January 26, 2026, Gerald C. Shu, EclaireMD Foundation, category, stroke and diabetes. Introduction. After my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025, a simple but important question stayed in my mind. Do glucose levels rise after a stroke? And if they do, why does this happen even when diabetes treatment is increased? This question is often discussed using large population averages, but rarely examined using detailed, continuous data from a patient. Because I have tracked my glucose and lifestyle data closely for over 16 years and collected over 1 million related data points, I was able to study this question using my own body as a long-term experimental laboratory. To do this, I compared my estimated average glucose EAG across 2 equal time periods. The first period covers the 7 months before my stroke, from November 1, 2024 to May 31, 2025. The second period covers the 7 months after my stroke, from July 1, 2025 to January 26, 2026. This comparison is especially meaningful because before my stroke, my glucose control depended entirely on lifestyle without any diabetes medication. After the stroke, I continued the same disciplined lifestyle, but added daily metformin at 2,000 milligrams. While my physical activity of daily walking steps was reduced from 14K steps down to 7,000 steps. Study design and personal context. Before my stroke, I managed my glucose entirely through strict daily habits. I carefully controlled food portions, limited carbohydrates and sugar, walked consistently, and maintained a stable sleep schedule. My average sleep was about 6 hours per night. My daily walking averaged around 14,000 steps and was very stable. Over many years, my metabolic system adapted well to this disciplined routine. During this entire pre-stroke period, I did not take any glucose-lowering medication. My average EAG during this time was 100 mg DL. After my stroke on June 21, 2025, several conditions changed. I began taking 2,000 milligrams of metformin daily. My dietary discipline remained the same, but my walking dropped by about 50% to roughly 7,000 steps per day, due to neurological recovery and physical limitations. At the same time, my average sleep increased from about 6 hours to about 8 hours per night. Despite medication use, my average EAG during the post-stroke period rose to 113 mg DL, which is 11 mg DL higher than my pre-stroke level. From the stroke perspective, the most important factor is that my body entered a prolonged recovery state after the brain injury. This state involved ongoing inflammation and stress responses that could not be fully avoided. Even with careful self-care and continued control of lifestyle behaviors and primary metabolic markers. In simple terms, this comparison is between a lower stress body before stroke using lifestyle alone, and a higher stress body after stroke using both lifestyle and medication. What the data show: before the stroke, my average EAG was 100.35 mg DL. The glucose graph during this period shows moderate ups and downs, but the overall level stayed stable and well controlled. When glucose levels rose, my body was usually able to bring them back down through lifestyle adjustments alone. After the stroke, my average EAG rose to 113.05 mg DL. The post-stroke graph shows a clear upward shift in glucose, along with larger swings. This pattern continued for many months and was not limited to a short recovery phase. Even with 2,000 milligrams metformin added, the overall glucose level settled at a higher baseline than before. If these numbers are viewed only through standard population charts, my post-stroke glucose might still appear acceptable since they are below 114 milligrams DL or HbA1c 5.6%. However, those charts only show whether a value falls inside a general range. They do not show direction, trend, or change over time. By comparing my own data before and after the stroke, it becomes clear that my body is now operating at a higher glucose level than it did before, even though my discipline did not weaken. This kind of change cannot be seen using traditional snapshot standards alone. Time-based strain stress observation in plain terms. To understand why this happened, I looked at how glucose responds to 2 main influences: fasting glucose in the morning and daily walking activity. The data were divided into 3 time phases. The first phase, 2:04 for Q3, serves as a starting reference. Engineers call it an initial condition. The second phase, from 2020 for Q4 through 2:05 Q2, represents the 3 quarters before the stroke. The third phase, from 20:05 Q3 through 2:06 Q1, represents the 3 quarters after the stroke. It is important to note that 2:06 Q1 includes only 26 days of data, so it does not fully represent a complete quarter. What the data show is that the relationship between glucose and these 2 factors is not simple or linear. Even though fasting glucose and EAG move together strongly, correlation 84%, and walking steps move in the opposite direction, correlation -77%. The changes do not follow a smooth or predictable path. In the earlier pre-stroke period, there were times when stress on the system decreased, showing that my body could still recover and adjust. After the stroke, as EAG moved into a higher range, this recovery pattern disappeared. Higher fasting glucose in the early morning, together with reduced daily walking, began to push glucose upward in a steady and persistent way. This pattern clearly shows the lasting metabolic damage caused by the stroke event. This change becomes especially clear once eAG rises above 110 mg dl. The graphs show that fasting glucose in early morning has a stronger immediate effect on eAG 57%. But reduced walking becomes increasingly important once the system loses reserve 43%. When physical activity drops in a stressed body, glucose control weakens faster. Viscoplastic energy accumulation explained simply, when these patterns are translated into accumulated burden over time, the picture becomes even clearer. Before the stroke incident in mid-2025, the total accumulated energy on my glucose system was relatively low, remaining below 10% after the stroke, beginning in the second half of 2025. This accumulated burden rose rapidly to about 40%. In simple terms, the accumulated metabolic energy after the stroke was roughly 4 times higher than before. This is a common pattern in chronic conditions. Damage builds quietly when the body can still compensate. Once the system crosses a threshold, deterioration accelerates. In my case, about 57% of the total burden came from fasting glucose instability, while about 43% came from reduced walking. This shows that medication and glucose control are critical. But physical activity remains a major contributor and cannot be ignored. Why medication was not enough? From a physiological point of view, this outcome is not surprising. Stroke triggers long-lasting activation of stress hormones, which raise glucose and reduce insulin sensitivity. Brain injury also affects how glucose is regulated centrally, not just how it is consumed. Reduced walking matters because muscle is the primary tissue that consumes glucose from the blood. Even a modest drop in physical activity can significantly reduce glucose use. At the same time, inflammation after a stroke further increases insulin resistance. In addition, a stroke is an energy-draining event. Many patients, including myself, feel persistent exhaustion, which naturally slows daily activity and often leads to longer sleep hours. Metformin helped reduce part of the glucose load, but it could not undo all of these changes. Medication works within a system. It does not reset the system. Conclusion: this self-case study shows that glucose levels tend to run higher after a stroke than before, even when medication treatment is intensified. This rise is not due to a loss of discipline. It reflects a real shift in how the body functions after a major neurological event such as a stroke. In my case, lifestyle alone before the stroke produced lower glucose than lifestyle plus medication after the stroke. This does not mean the medication failed. It means the stroke caused a visible shift in the body baseline. Stroke is not just a brain injury. It is a whole body event. Understanding and managing chronic disease after stroke requires system-level thinking, patience, and respect for how deeply the body has been altered. This study shows why time-based observation is essential. Population tables and single-point standards cannot detect changes in trajectory or loss of recovery capacity. Only longitudinal data can reveal these shifts. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights belong to the author, Gerald CHSU. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald CHSU.